From Global's newsroom at 4 o'clock, the government is facing calls to act straight away to deliver justice for post office branch managers. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the remaining wrongful convictions in the Horizon scandal should be reviewed en masse. Hundreds were found guilty of fraud and theft because of a faulty IT system showing shortfalls in the company's accounts. Rishi Sunak, who's been speaking in Accrington, has defended the government's response.
People should know that we are on it and we want to make this right. The money's been set aside. Now, what we are now looking at is how can we speed all of that up, right? Understandably, I'm very clear, want to get that out the door as quickly as possible. There are legal processes that people have had to go through, but the Justice Secretary today is meeting with the relevant ministers to see is there more we can do.
He also says he would strongly support a review of the CBE awarded to former Post Office boss Paula Vennell. Idris Elba has told LBC the government should act to ban zombie knives as quickly as they did XL bully dogs. The actor has met with bereaved families, saying he's frustrated that not enough is being done to stop young people dying.
It's stuck in the halls of some loophole somewhere. But there is someone in power in our country, and I'm talking about the top in command, who can kind of say, do you know what? Put it on my desk on Monday and let's really think through this. Because it happened when it came to the bulldog, American bulldog, and it got banned very quickly, okay? Yeah. And we can do the same for knives, and we should.
The Home Office announced tougher measures last August, but the legislation is yet to be brought to Parliament. Lebanese officials say an Israeli airstrike has killed an elite Hezbollah commander in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah identified the man who was killed as Wissam al-Tawil. 3 teenagers have admitted the manslaughter of a man who died at his home after being attacked in a park. 36-year-old John Hackett died in Nuneaton in Warwickshire last April. A girl aged 16 and 2 15-year-old boys who can't be named because of their age will be sentenced in March. And a US company which is sending an unmanned spacecraft to the moon says a problem has occurred after launch. The solar-powered craft is currently unable to face towards the sun. In the city, a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was trading down 4 points at 76.85. The pound buys $1.27 and €1.16. LBC weather: sleet and snow showers tonight for the southwest of England and Wales. Dry with patchy cloud elsewhere, lows of -7. Cloud clearing in the south tomorrow to leave largely bright skies. Plenty of winter sunshine further north with patchy cloud in the northeast. A high of 7 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Tom Swarbrick.
Very good afternoon to you. 3 minutes past 4 is the time. Tom Swarbrick here on LBC. Welcome to the show. Hope we find you well. This hour, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in the Middle East for further talks with the key players about the war in Gaza and the early public discussions about what happens when the fighting is scaled back. Suggestions from a partner in Netanyahu's governing coalition that residents of Gaza migrate away from the Strip have been met with sharp criticism today from Blinken, saying Palestinians must not be pressured into leaving Gaza and must be allowed to return to their homes once conditions allow. Meantime, an Israeli strike on a refugee camp in North Gaza has reportedly killed 70 people, but that is according to the Hamas-run medical facilities. A spokesperson for the IDF said that it, quotes, acted against a military target in the strike and that it was not aware of the number of casualties mentioned. The war is very much still being fought, and the battle over what comes next is starting up as well. This hour, your chance to question the Israeli government directly. Nothing is off limits. Anything you want to put to Eylon Levy, who's a spokesperson for the Israeli government, you can call live. 0345 6060 973 is the number. You can also watch us live too on Global Player. So pick up the phone, get on the radio. Your questions being answered directly by the spokesperson for the Israeli government, who is Eylon Levy. Thank you for coming on the programme again, Mr. Levy. Happy New Year to you. Let us start with those comments from Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying that Gazans have to be allowed to live in Gaza and they must be allowed to return to their homes once conditions allow. Does the Israeli government agree?
We hope that the day after Hamas, it will be possible to rebuild the Gaza Strip in a way that ensures that concrete goes to people's houses and not to the sorts of terror tunnels that Hamas has been building underneath people's houses. You know, just yesterday I was in the Gaza Strip together with journalists to visit one of the Hamas terror tunnels. It stretches 4 kilometers into the Gaza Strip from the Israeli border, and it's just astonishing to see the amount of cement and money that Hamas poured into building its whole underground city instead of building civilian facilities above ground. So we certainly hope that when this war ends and Hamas is no more, the Gaza Strip will be rebuilt peacefully. And rebuilt peacefully by an administration committed to living alongside Israel in peace rather than pursuing Hamas's own fantasies of violently destroying our country.
But those Palestinians who are currently not in their homes because they've been bombed, they would live there too.
Absolutely. Those Palestinians are currently not in their homes because we urged them to evacuate to safe areas before the beginning of the ground offensive. And the reason we did that is that Hamas has spent the last 16 years deliberately building its military facilities underneath homes, schools, hospitals, mosques, even UN facilities. Most of the 1,500 tunnel shafts that we have found have been inside civilian buildings. And because we don't want civilians to be hurt, we urge them to evacuate so that we can target the Hamas military infrastructure that it was trying to hide with those civilians above ground. And we hope that when the fighting ends and Hamas is no more, people can return and the Gaza Strip can be rebuilt peacefully.
So any suggestion from Israeli government figures that they should move out, that they should go and migrate and live somewhere else, Egypt potentially, that's not the position of the Israeli government, or is it?
That is not the position of the Israeli government.
Let's get to some calls. 0345 6060 973 is the number. Your chance to speak to and question Mr. Eylon Levy, who's a spokesperson for the Israeli government. Let us start with Lee, who's in Newcastle. Hi, Lee.
Hi, Tom. Hi.
Your question to Mr. Levy.
Hi, Eylon as well. Eylon,
hello, Lee.
Hello. I agree with Zippy Hotavelli that I think the two-state solution is off the table. That would have been my preferred option years ago, but I think it's gone now. So the day after the war finishes, how are Palestinians expected to live in Israel? Will they be given equal rights as Jews in Israel? Like, will Palestinians have the right to return in any way, shape or form to their prior homes?
It's a good question. Just for listeners, Zippy Hotavelli, the Israeli ambassador to the UK, was asked whether Palestinians should have their own state. Her answer was absolutely no. Mr. Levy, if not a two-state solution, what does the Israeli government believe in happening?
Well, the Prime Minister here, his position has been consistent that we think the Palestinians should have all the rights to govern themselves and none of the rights to threaten us. Now, on October 7th, we saw what happened as the result of an Israeli territorial withdrawal. Let's remember in 2005, Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip. We pulled the army out. We pulled out 8,000 settlers. We gave the keys to the Palestinians and said, good luck. We want to live next to you in peace and security. And what followed was a Hamas takeover of the Gaza Strip, a territory that they subordinated towards their goals of war against Israel. And on October 7th, we saw the brutal massacre with the invasion and brutal killing of 1,200 people. Now, many Israelis, as a result, will have serious questions about what the security implications would be of a withdrawal from the West Bank. The West Bank is an area 20 times the size of the Gaza Strip. It is a mountain range that overlooks Tel Aviv and surrounds Jerusalem. And many Israelis, including those who in principle would be very happy to reach a territorial compromise with the Palestinians, will be asking serious questions about whether that can be done safely when polls show us that a majority of Palestinians in the West Bank in fact support Hamas's October 7th atrocities. But these are long-term political questions, and we hope that we will find a political accommodation with the Palestinians. For now, we are focusing on destroying the terror regime that perpetrated the October 7th massacre, because however you think that we should achieve peace between Israel and the Palestinians, one thing is clear: there is no room for Hamas in that vision of peace. It is a brutal army of terror and organization of hate that exists with the stated mission of wiping our country off the map. And that is why we will fight it, and fight it forcefully.
If the demilitarization of Gaza needs to happen. A functioning civil administration needs to be built, and there needs to be de-radicalisation, which I think are the three aims that Israel has talked about making happen. To what extent should people not be concerned that the manner in which the military operation is being undertaken will only increase the radicalisation, as one might put it, of civilians both in the West Bank and Gaza?
This is a question that I get often, and I find it strange, because what will fuel extremism is if the Hamas rapist regime gets away with the crimes it perpetrated on October 7th. If the lesson that Hamas gets after burning, beheading, mutilating, raping, abducting so many Israelis is that it can get away with it, that the world will step in and stop Israel from defending itself, that is something that is going to fuel extremism. And what is going to stop extremism is the total defeat of Hamas, making it clear to Palestinians who support terrorism, not all of them, but unfortunately a large number, that terrorism is a dead end, and that the choice to embark on violent war against Israel instead of living peacefully alongside it has always and will always bring them misery. And we hope that we can have a future of peace and prosperity together with our Palestinian neighbors, but that will require them as a society and as a movement to accept that they will live next to a peaceful, prosperous, democratic and secure state of Israel instead of trying to replace it.
Might not be entirely secure from their point
that.
of view if there are Israeli government members going around saying we'd like you to all leave your homes and never come back, or indeed threatening to drop nuclear weapons. You've said that's not the position of the Israeli government. It strikes me as very bizarre.
That is not only not a statement of the Israeli government, those particular strange remarks were also forcefully condemned by the Prime Minister, who said that they were disconnected from reality. His participation in government was suspended at that point. The Prime Minister made clear his remarks are disconnected from reality.
Right. Ayaz is a new caller in Leeds. Hi, Ayaz.
Hi there.
Your question.
Yeah, my question to the spokesman is that, since you claim that the IDF and the Zionist government is so sympathetic towards the Palestinians and the civilians, and, you're trying to wipe out Hamas, but what about the West Bank and, where there is absolutely no Hamas? Why is there so many people being killed in the West Bank? Why are so many homes being demolished? Isn't it obvious what the actual IDF or the Israeli government, what their aim is? To ethnically cleanse all of the Palestinians from this land? It's very obvious. And how can you sit there, defending and saying that we want the Palestinians to live peacefully and care? What is the actual aim? It's obvious. So how can you defend the IDF when there is no Hamas in the West Bank? Why is there so many people being killed in the West Bank? That's my question.
Mr. Levy.
First of all, on a factual level, it's not true that there is no Hamas in the West Bank. Hamas does not control the West Bank, thank God, because otherwise it would be using it to fire rockets at Israel. And if in Tel Aviv we have a minute and a half to run for shelter when there is a missile attack from Gaza, we would have only 20 seconds to run if there were a missile attack from the West Bank. Hamas has a large presence, and unfortunately, it is very popular among the Palestinian people. Polls show repeatedly that 82% of Palestinians in the West Bank think that it was the correct decision by Hamas to launch the atrocities of October 7th.
Why do you think they think that?
Despite all the suffering that has happened in Gaza since. Well, unfortunately, the Palestinian National Movement has for decades refused to accept the legitimacy of a Jewish state in any borders whatsoever within the land of Israel, or what they call Palestine. Israel has repeatedly made very generous offers towards the Palestinians of some sort of territorial compromise, but unfortunately the Palestinians remain committed to a vision of, as people are chanting on the streets of London, from the river to the sea.
But others do not. And just to come back to Ayaz's question about why it is that there are so many civilians in the West Bank dying here, you talked about wanting Hamas to be responsible for its crimes, and that's, of course, absolutely right. But do you agree that where there are allegations of crimes being committed, people should face the consequences of that?
You asked two very separate questions, and I'd like to address them separately. First of all, the Palestinians as a national movement and society remain committed to the vision of what they call the liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea, which leaves no room for the state of Israel. That is what people on pro-Palestinian protests are chanting in London, from the river to the sea. Between the river and the sea is also sovereign Israel. Now, I have yet to see any Palestinians running up to these protesters in London and saying, excuse me, you didn't get the message sheet. It's not from the river to the sea. It's from the river to the 1967 borders. Palestine will be free. The rest is Israel. We want to live in peace and security with it. And I think that's very compelling proof of the fact that the Palestinians remain committed first and foremost to that vision of replacing Israel rather than reconciling
come back again to the idea
next
of
to it.
not everybody in the Palestinian movement believes that.
Of course, not all. And there is a small minority who accept living next to Israel. But unfortunately, when we see protests around the world chanting from the river to the sea, the message that it is sending to the Palestinians is not, you should embrace a future of peace and security living next to Israel and try to find territorial compromise and live in peace in the land. It is fueling extremism because it is telling them, we have your backs as you continue your campaign of violence against Israel to try to replace their country at the expense of trying to build your own.
Well, now to the question about agreeing on principle, the idea that if crimes have been committed and there is evidence for those crimes being committed, that people who committed those crimes get punished in law.
Of course, we are a law-abiding democracy with a very, very strong legal infrastructure, a very strong Supreme Court, very strong military prosecutors. And whenever there are suggestions of misdemeanors or crimes, we, of course, take that very seriously.
Including illegal settlements.
But we dispute the interpretation of that as being illegal. We don't think that it is illegal for Jews to live in Judea. We take a different approach. But of course, whenever there are claims of any sort of illegality, we take that very seriously as a state and an army that remain very firmly committed to the principles of international law.
Well, again, there's going to be disputes about how that international law is applied. Foreign Secretary David Cameron talking about that the other day. 03456060973 is the number. 84850 to text. You can watch us too on Global Player. We're joined for the hour by Eylon Levy, spokesperson for the Israeli government. Your chance to get your questions answered directly by a spokesperson for the Israeli government here on LBC. More to come. 4:17.
LBC Travel, I'm Dave Goff. It's slow on the M4 westbound. The exit slip road to the M25 clockwise at junction 4B is closed because of a shed load. The A2 eastbound stays closed between the Darenth interchange and the Bean interchange after a milk tanker caught fire this morning. There are delays in Chingford on the North Circular eastbound because a car has broken down at the Cooks Ferry interchange. In Bushy Heath, the high road is closed both ways at Heathbourne Road because of an accident. In Rootham, there are queues on the A20 and on Gravesend Road in both directions around the M20. That's because of snow. On the Tube, there are severe delays on the Piccadilly line from Acton Town to Uxbridge and Heathrow Airports. And on the trains, Great Northern have no service between Finsbury Park and Moorgate.
This is LBC. Call Tom Swarbrick 0345 6060 973 LBC. leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC with Tom Swarbrick.
4:21 is the time. Tom Swarbrick here this Monday afternoon on LBC, where we're joined for the hour by Eylon Levy, spokesperson for the Israeli government. Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, is in the region, heading to Israel shortly. And as we speak, the House of Commons is back in session. Foreign Minister Andrew Mitchell telling the House of Commons that the risk of famine in Gaza is stark. Mr. Levy, is that an assessment you share?
Absolutely not. You know, Israel has excess capacity at the moment to inspect aid trucks. If the international community wants more aid to go into Gaza, it should send more aid, and we're ready to receive it. In fact, so much aid is going through that the UN has asked us to close the crossings on weekends in order to deal with the backlog on the Palestinian side. Unfortunately, we are seeing two things that are getting in the way of effective aid distribution inside the Gaza Strip. One, Hamas has been hijacking aid trucks, and the videos have circulated widely, and I hope people have seen images of the armed gunmen on top of aid trucks. And the second, unfortunately, is that the UN has been covering up for it. And the international agencies that we look up to, that are supposed to have moral authority, have said nothing about the way that Hamas has been stealing aid from the Palestinian people. So we're demanding accountability from those organizations, demanding they speak out
deny that,
against
obviously.
Hamas stealing aid.
But we've got a problem here, because the British government say the risk of famine is stark in Gaza, and there you are on behalf of the Israeli government saying no, it isn't. Who are people meant to trust?
Well, at the moment, we have 200 trucks that are entering Gaza every day. Since the beginning of the war, we've had 130,000 trucks going into the Gaza Strip. And if Britain wants more food to reach Gaza, it should simply send more food. We have said from the beginning there is absolutely no limit at all on the amount of food, water, medicine or shelter equipment that can enter the Gaza Strip. We have excess capacity at our crossings in order to facilitate that delivery into the Gaza Strip. So anyone who wants more aid to enter people in Gaza should send more aid and should condemn Hamas for hijacking it while they're at it.
Here's Shabir in Accrington. Hi, Shabir.
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Your question, sir.
My question to the gentleman is as follows. You deliberately bombed Al-Shifa Hospital. You showed the world the tunnels under the Al-Shifa Hospital. Live on the World Global interview, your ex-Prime Minister categorically said that those tunnels were built by Israel. How do you expect the world to trust you when you lie after lie?
A very loaded question there. Let me try to explain one by one. First of all, Hamas built its main command and control center underneath the Shifa Hospital in Gaza. And we exposed the evidence for the world. We showed a 10-meter deep tunnel shaft, that's like 2 double-decker buses, leading to a 50-meter-long tunnel, which ends with a blast door. Once you go through that blast door, we showed a whole network underneath the hospital, and we think it is appalling that Hamas has deliberately endangered the lives of Palestinian civilians.
Question, who built those tunnels originally? Were they not
Hamas
originally built by the Israeli government?
No, let me explain. The Al-Shifa Hospital was built during the period of Israel's administration, and Israel helped to build basement in the hospital. Every hospital has a basement. The question is what basements are used for. Are those basements used in order to hold medicines and patients, or are they used to hold terrorists? Now, what Hamas did was under that basement, they built a whole complex, a whole tunnel network. That tunnel network that we saw revealed by the IDF was not built by Israel. It was built by Hamas. And the reason that Hamas did that is that Hamas knows that when it hides its military facilities underneath civilian areas, it gives them protection. And unfortunately, international law does not give immunity to terrorists simply because they hide under a hospital. On the contrary, international law, the Geneva Conventions, say clearly that when protected facilities are used for military purposes, they can lose their protected status. And we think it is appalling that Hamas decided, as part of its human shield strategy, to deliberately endanger the people above ground by building military facilities inside the basement. We think it is shameful that the World Health Organization cannot bring itself to condemn that. And it's important to note that we have destroyed that terror tunnel network under the Shifa Hospital with minimal damage to the hospital above ground. And
Let me come back to
a few
Shabir.
days ago,
Let me come back to Shabir for a thought.
If I could just finish the sentence. The footage shows clearly that hospital building still standing because we target Hamas terror infrastructure, not civilian infrastructure.
Shabir.
I know don't believe the gentleman, because how would an ex-prime minister lie? Because he said you built the tunnels themselves. So why would you sit there and justify otherwise?
Well, isn't the answer to the question, Shabir, it was that the tunnels, the basement of the hospital may well have been built as the Israelis were in charge of Gaza at that period of time.
But also, Tom, just on a small factual point, former Prime Minister Barak did not say...
I'm sorry, but I'm sorry to interrupt, but the gentleman categorically said, not the basement, the tunnels were built by Israel. That's what he said.
Mr. Barak
now, either you're saying your ex-prime minister is lying, and you're telling the truth. So one or the other is lying in this conversation.
The former Prime Minister is not lying. You, sir, must have misheard him, because he did not use the word tunnels.
No,
he did not say...
I did not misheard him, because the interviewer repeated her question. Do you want to repeat yourself? And he repeated exactly the same thing.
LBC's excellent fact checkers, while we are on the air, can go back and check the transcript and find that that is not what Mr. Barak said, and that those terror tunnels built underneath the hospital, which Hamas built, were used by Hamas cynically, in flagrant violation of international law, to try to shield its military assets by hiding them underneath civilians. And it's not just the Shifa hospital. That has been Hamas's strategy across the Gaza Strip. Of the 1,500 tunnel shafts that we have found in Gaza, the overwhelming majority were hidden inside schools, hospitals, kindergartens, mosques, universities and homes.
Is that to say
and
where
Hamas
you find Hamas anywhere?
Cityscape.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Levy, but just for time reasons. Is that to say that anywhere that Hamas exists is a target for Israel?
Anywhere that Hamas exists is an area that we will do everything we can to get civilians out of harm's way so that we can target the military infrastructure responsible for the brutal atrocities of October 7th, which Hamas has been threatening to repeat every day since they brutally massacred 1,200 people and abducted 250 people into the Gaza Strip, including hostages it is now holding in inhumane conditions in some of those tunnels.
Nick's in Ilford. Hi, Nick.
Hi. As you will know, the Times of Israel is a trusted and respected publication. They've had two recent headlines that I'd like you to confirm or deny. The first one being that Israel is in talks with Congo and other countries concerning a voluntary migration plan. And the second one being that Netanyahu propped up the Hamas government to keep them in power.
On the first question, voluntary migration is not the policy of the State of Israel. Our policy is that the day after Hamas, the Gaza Strip will be rebuilt peacefully and will be rebuilt by Palestinians who realize that terrorism is a dead end and we can never go back to the mistakes of the Hamas regime that has brought nothing but misery on the people of Gaza by hiding its military infrastructure underneath their civilian homes. That is the policy of the State of Israel.
So no one is sending any Gazan anywhere else than they have to be for now, you say, in order for this war to be finished.
Anywhere. And while this war is ongoing, we have been urging them to go to the Al-Mawasi humanitarian zone. We designated an area where we said, look, Hamas isn't fighting there. Hamas hasn't hidden itself under homes. We think people should go there because that is where they can be protected. And we think it is shameful and we feel betrayed by the international community that instead of working with us to protect civilians inside Gaza, they funneled them into Hamas strongholds instead, where Hamas can use them as human shields. And we think they share a good part of the blame for the casualties that we have seen by refusing to evacuate them to areas that we have designated as being safe.
And to Nick's second question about Netanyahu's funding of Hamas.
No, and no one even claims that the Prime Minister funded Hamas. I think someone has misread the headline there. We have, over the course of previous years, embarked on multiple campaigns against Hamas inside the Gaza Strip, which keeps shooting rockets towards Israel. In fact, just as I was about to go on air here, there were several explosions overhead from nearby rocket fire. The thing is that over the past few years, Israel tried to find a way to live next to the Hamas regime. We tried to find every way not to get the war that we have now because we knew what the cost would be.
Just on the point about the safe zone, you talk about the Al-Mawasi safe area. There are reports today that 14 people, the majority of them children under the age of 10, have been killed by Israeli airstrikes near the Al-Mawasi area designated a humanitarian zone. Why are Israel targeting or at least striking areas where people are meant to be safe?
Sure, I haven't seen that report, but what I can tell you is this. After we designated the humanitarian zone, Hamas started shooting rockets out of it. Hamas started shooting rockets out of the humanitarian zone at Israeli cities. And we feel deeply betrayed and hurt by the UN and international agencies that cannot bring themselves to condemn a terror organization for shooting rockets out of a humanitarian zone at our towns and cities. And I think people who look up to the United Nations for moral authority need to ask themselves,
so
why
nowhere
it
is
so
safe
difficult.
in Gaza. Nowhere is safe in Gaza for Gazans while Hamas is there.
No area where Hamas is operating is safe because Hamas's deliberate
But that could be
strategy.
everywhere. So nowhere is safe in Gaza for Gazans.
And that shows the importance of defeating the Hamas regime as soon as possible. Because, Tom, if we
This is
don't
total
bring down the
destruction,
Hamas
isn't it?
regime...
This could result in the total destruction of Gaza.
Tom, the first thing that Hamas did after committing the brutal atrocities of October 7 and abducting 250 people was to tell us that one October 7 was not enough and that it wants to do it all over again. And we know, and the British government knows as well, and it's spoken very forcefully on this point, that if this war ends with Hamas still standing, Hamas will attack Israelis again just as it did on October 7th.
And if that means the destruction of Gaza...
It means the destruction of Hamas military facilities that it has built in flagrant violation of international law underneath civilian areas to try to use them as human shields. And we are doing everything we can to try to get civilians to safety and out of the way of Hamas. Unfortunately, the UN agencies that are supposed to be responsible for helping keep people safe have been stubbornly resisting our attempts to try to get people out of harm's way.
Well, I want to talk in a few moments about how that's going.
Agencies, if I could just finish this point, we think that UN agencies that should be doing their job to keep civilians safe should be condemning Hamas for building military bases in hospitals, for storing its weapons inside kindergartens and schools, instead of trying to deflect blame onto Israel to cover up the fact that they are covering up for Hamas.
I want to come back to the numbers of Hamas fighters killed in just a moment. You're listening to Eylon Levy, spokesperson for the Israeli government. Your calls coming to him. 0345 6060 973 is the number. Many more to come as well. Tom Swarbrick here, 4:33 News Headlines now. Amelia Cox.
The government is facing calls to move straight away to review wrongful convictions in the Horizon scandal en masse. Rishi Sunak has defended its response, saying ministers want to make this right. A spokesperson for the Israeli government insists the Prime Minister believes Palestinians should have the right to govern themselves. Eylon Levy has told LBC the day after Hamas is defeated, he hopes Gaza can rebuild. And actor Idris Elba is calling for the immediate ban of machetes and so-called zombie knives. He's called for ministers to act as quickly as they did on XL bully dogs. LBC weather: sleet and snow showers tonight for the southwest of England and Wales. Dry with patchy cloud elsewhere, lows of -7.
Tonight with Andrew Marr from 6 p.m. only on LBC.
It is easy to forget. The story about migration is really a human one, where lives are literally on the line. And in an LBC exclusive, we spoke to someone who currently lives on the Bibby Stockholm.
Andrew Marr.
I came to Britain to be free, but the fact is that we are in the most restricted situation that any asylum seeker could face or experience in the world.
Tonight with Andrew Marr from 6 p.m. Listen on your radio and Global Player, the official LBC app. Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
4:37 the time. Tom Swarbrick here on LBC. You can, of course, watch us on Global Player as well. Your questions being answered by Eylon Levy, a spokesperson for the Israeli government, here until 5. Elisa's in Chelmsford. Elisa, your question.
Hello, Eylon. My heart goes out to the hostages and the families of those hostages.
Thank you.
How many of the 136 hostages currently being kept in Gaza does the government believe are still alive?
Thank you for your support and sympathy. The hostage issue is a source of incredible pain and frustration for the Israeli people. We're a very small country, so 250 hostages means everyone knows at least someone who had someone stolen from them, and we are sick with worry for the fate of those people still trapped in the Hamas terror dungeons. Of the 136 hostages still trapped, we believe that around 24 of them have since been murdered by Hamas in captivity, and it is now holding on to their bodies for a ransom.
It's just heartbreaking. Every night when I lay my head on my pillow, all I visualise is the families of the hostages and those poor hostages that are currently being kept in tunnels, young girls that have been raped, people that have been tortured. It's just unbearable. And I'm finding that people are forgetting to talk about the hostages, and it's very important for me to keep that alive, to keep reminding people about those hostages. It's not just about, what's going on in Gaza and the destruction because you're trying to get to Hamas. There are real people that are suffering every single night, and we need to think about them. My heart is breaking every day.
Elisa, that's well said.
You're
and
right.
one of the reasons for going in to Gaza was to get those hostages back. As of December the 22nd, only one hostage has actually been rescued, as opposed to either being released through a prisoner exchange or any other method. Has that number increased?
We have 110 hostages who have been released, mostly as a result of the hostage release pause that we agreed with Hamas, where in exchange for giving it a break in the fighting, it released hostages. Now, we hope that that framework would continue and we would be able to get at least all of the women and children out. Unfortunately, on December 1st, Hamas decided to stop releasing all the women and children and to resume rocket fire at Israel. And everyone in Israel is really sick with worry for the hostages. We're talking about intensely vulnerable people. Certainly the women, given everything we know about the Hamas sexual atrocities. Elderly people without their medication. I spoke just the other day with Rachel Goldberg, an incredibly brave woman who has been lobbying for her son Hirsch, who was abducted from the Nova Music Festival after Hamas death squads threw grenades into a roadside bomb shelter, killed most of the young people there, and blew his, I'm sorry to be too graphic on Drive Time Radio, blew off his left arm from the elbow down. And they've been denied access to the Red Cross. And tragically, we had the president of the Red Cross here in Israel, and the prime minister said, you need to pressure Hamas to get access to the hostages. And she shuffled in her seat and said, that's not going to work. And you know what? We don't think that's good enough. We think the international community needs to put more pressure to make sure that those hostages are released not only immediately and unconditionally, but that they get access to the Red Cross and medical treatment.
Does Israel know where these hostages are? As I say, only one hostage has actually been rescued, which is part of Israel's reason for going in. And of course, there was this incident before Christmas where IDF soldiers killed 3 of Israel's own hostages who were reportedly running at them saying help in Hebrew, half naked, waving white flags.
Yeah, really a tragic incident that shocked the whole country. I wish there were an option for the army to swoop in with special forces and grab the hostages, as Israeli special forces have done in the past with hostage crises. Unfortunately, Hamas has spent a very long time preparing for this, and we know that those hostages are either hidden inside tunnels that will be booby-trapped, or, and this is really shocking and is coming out from the survivors of the Hamas terror dungeons, we know that many of the hostages were actually held inside civilians' homes. As difficult as this is to believe, we know that they were being held in ordinary people's houses, and so they're spread out across the Gaza Strip. Hamas is making it very difficult to reach them, and that's why our strategy now is to put unrelenting military pressure on Hamas until it begs for another breather, Gaza and is willing to release the hostages. Standing by and simply asking nicely or sending Hamas an email to release the hostages was never an option.
All right. Elisa, thank you for the call. Dave's in Liverpool. Dave.
Yes, hello. I'd like to ask Mr. Levy that in light of the thousands of men, women, children, babies who have been killed in Gaza, how does he think that Israel is going to secure a lasting peace? Because you do think all those people who have lost, family members or had their homes destroyed would be seeking some sort of retribution against Israel. So I just don't see how you are really securing the safety of people in your country by your actions.
Is there a question, Dave?
Well, yeah, the question is, how do you think you're making Israel more secure when you're making more people have a vengeance against you?
Back to the point I was making about the attempts to try and de-radicalise that part of the world. Mr. Levy.
First of all, you're right. The humanitarian situation is deeply upsetting. Every civilian casualty is a tragedy. Civilian casualties are unfortunately a tragic feature of every war, and they're a tragic feature of this war, which Hamas started, which Hamas launched with the October 7th massacre, and is fighting out of densely populated areas where it is deliberately hiding itself under people's homes, schools and hospitals. And everyone who has been killed would still be alive if Hamas had not started this war, and if Hamas simply surrendered, laid down its arms, handed back the hostages, and allowed us to move towards a future of peace and prosperity. But on October 7th, Hamas invaded Israel. Hamas brutally massacred 1,200 people. They burned whole families alive, and they abducted 250 hostages. And at that point, we faced a choice: to leave the hostages in Gaza, abandon them, and leave in place the terror regime that tells us it wants to do it again.
The mission to go and get them
destroy.
hasn't been a success, has it? If only one hostage has been returned via rescue, it's not been successful as an operation to go in and get them out.
We have succeeded in securing the release of 110 hostages as a result of the military pressure that we placed on Hamas. And what we are doing now is destroying the Hamas terror state so it cannot hurt our people again. Because the sad fact is, we want this war to be over. We want it to go away, and we want all of our friends who are in reserves, and there are parents in this country who can't sleep because their children have left their ordinary day jobs or in reserves. We want them home, but we know that this war can't end until Hamas is destroyed, because otherwise Hamas will attack us again, as it tells us repeatedly that it wants to do. We're in a situation now where there are no good options, only less bad options. Now, we know that we can't defeat an idea, we can't defeat an ideology, but we can remove it from power. And 10 years ago, the UK was one of 86 nations that decided that ISIS, Daesh, could not be allowed to control territory from which to perpetrate crimes against humanity.
ISIS didn't have a democratic imperative, though, as Hamas may do, given the vote in Gaza. But I take the point that certainly the UK was involved in that effort to wipe out ISIS.
And I'm not sure that the claim that Hamas is democratically elected necessarily supports certain claims about the civilian population in Gaza, but we distinguish between the military and between civilians, and we're doing everything we can to destroy the terror regime that is telling us it wants to burn, behead, rape and abduct our children again. Right. And we'll do it if we don't stop it.
Dave,
and by the way, that's also why the UK, the official position of the UK government is it wants us to win this war. And it was Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden who said just 2 weeks ago, we must eradicate Hamas. And Lord Cameron writing in the Sunday Times saying Hamas must lay down its arms.
Yes, but you know that support
is
qualified. The support is not unqualified, do as you please in Gaza. The support is qualified on the basis of international law, and there are lots of questions about how Israel has been operating around that. Dave, thank you for the call. 0345 6060 973. You can watch us live on Global Player. Tom Swarbrick here. It's 4:47.
LBC Travel, I'm Dave Goff. It's slow on the M4 westbound. The exit slip road to the M25 clockwise at junction 4B is closed because of a shed load. The A2 eastbound stays shut between the Darenth interchange and the Bean interchange after a milk tanker caught fire this morning, so there are queues. There are delays in Chingford on the North Circular eastbound because a car has broken down at the Cooks Ferry interchange. It's slow in South Woodford on the North Circular westbound because a car has broken down at Waterworks Corner. In Rootham, there are queues on the A20 and on Gravesend Road in both directions around the M20. That's because of snow. On the Tube, there are severe delays on the Piccadilly line from Axon Town to Uxbridge and Heathrow Airport. And on the trains, Great Northern have no service between Finsbury Park and Moorgate.
This is LBC. Call Tom Swarbrick 0345 6060 973 LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Tom Swarbrick. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
10 to 5, Eylon Levy with us until 5. He's a spokesperson for the Israeli government and your chance to put your questions to him. That's why Yasser has called from Norbury. Hi, Yasser.
Hi there, Tom. How are you?
I'm well, sir. Your question for Mr. Levy, please.
My question is, how is it justifiable that the IDF are targeting journalists who are reporting from the ground in Gaza? What is the reason? How is he going to justify that?
Mr. Levy.
Well, it would be horrific if we were targeting journalists, but we are not. We are targeting the Hamas military machine. We're targeting the terrorists who perpetrated the October 7 massacre. We're targeting the terrorists who are threatening us with repeat massacres unless we stop them. And we're absolutely not targeting journalists. That's a despicable allegation.
Yes, sir?
Yeah, yesterday you killed one of the Hamza, a journalist from Al Jazeera. He was in a car going to cover a story with another journalist from the AFP. You targeted them with a drone attack and killed them on the spot. His dad is an Al Jazeera journalist. His whole family has been killed by the IDF. That is shown in the news. How are you going to deny that?
Israel does not target journalists. Israel does not target civilians. We target terrorists, and we target terrorists who tragically are hiding and embedding themselves among civilian areas. And that's why we have made such intense efforts to try to get civilians
were these two men
out
terrorists?
of harm's way. I'm not familiar with the specifics. This is an active war zone, and I don't know the specifics of this case.
But they're in
we
a car.
Are targeting
they're in a
terrorists.
car driving along, and they get hit with a drone strike. And it turns out that they're not terrorists. They're two journalists who were on their way to do a job. That's what happened, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I'm not familiar with the specifics of this case. I would check the details with the IDF. There is a lot happening in war as we target the
But it goes
Hamas
to this
terror
claim about
machine.
it being a targeted campaign. So in the incident in North Gaza, where there was a hit at Jabalia refugee camp, you were clearly targeting someone or a number of people. How many Hamas terrorists were killed in that strike?
Northern Gaza is an area that Israel has been urging civilians to evacuate from since, I believe, the 13th of October. And we've already successfully evacuated the large majority of civilians from the northern Gaza Strip because that is where Hamas built the bulk of its terrorist infrastructure. Now, we managed to do that. We secured humanitarian corridors for people to get out, including in cases when Hamas was trying to stop them from evacuating. Because Hamas knows that if it can hold on to civilians, Israel cannot reach them. So they tried to stop people evacuating northern Gaza, and we secured humanitarian corridors for them to get out. Our soldiers placed 70,000 individual phone calls.
So they shouldn't have been there.
Gaza
What you're saying is you shouldn't have been there. It's, you know, if 70 people died, 70 people died. If we killed a Hamas terrorist in the process, great, but we don't really know. And they shouldn't have been there anyway because they were given warnings to leave.
No, Tom, I wouldn't be so flippant. I would say this is an area where Israel has been urging civilians to evacuate for the last 2 months because we take very seriously our obligations under international law to minimize civilian casualties while fighting in what is a unique counter-terrorism warfare challenge of a terrorist enemy that has spent 16 years deliberately building its infrastructure under civilian areas to try to use them as human shields.
How many Hamas terrorists have you killed?
We believe that we've killed at least 8,000 Hamas terrorists and apprehended close to another 1,000.
And I know that the figures are disputed, but a senior Israeli military official said that there are 2 civilians killed for every Hamas fighter killed. So that's about 17,000 civilians killed. Is that right?
I don't know the exact ratio, but that would be broadly in line with the civilian to combatant ratio in other counterterrorism wars fought by Western armies. I think that the civilian to combatant ratio was significantly higher during Britain's campaign in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the war against ISIS. And we believe that when the fog of war clears and whatever that number is becomes clear, it will show very clearly the extent that the IDF has gone to try to protect civilians, despite Hamas's evil strategy.
So
of trying
even
to
by
maximize
those numbers,
civilian casualties.
Even by those numbers, the 8,000, roughly 8,500 fighters and the 17,000 potential civilian casualties, if it's 2 to 1, you would say what? That's a good outcome. People should be, you know, taking their hats off to the way in which the Israeli military have gone about conducting this, because that's not bad.
No, I wouldn't be blasé. I would say that all civilian casualties are tragic, and we are very angry at Hamas that it has decided to use Palestinians in Gaza as human shields. But we are saying that this is a war that Hamas waged against us. And when you measure metrics for war, you need to compare it to similar battles around the world by other democratic states. And if you compare it to the UK and the US in Afghanistan, Iraq, and against ISIS, the ratio will show clearly the efforts that Israel has made to try to get civilians out of harm's way. You know, Tom, we could have ended this war on October 8th if we didn't care about civilian casualties. We could have gone in straight with tanks into central Gaza without urging civilians to leave. But we surrendered the element of surprise because it was important for us to get civilians out of harm's way. We don't need you to give us a pat on the back. We know exactly what efforts we have made, and we know that we take very seriously our obligation, even though we are fighting a brutal jihadist terror organization that has as much respect for humanitarian law as it does for basic norms of humanity.
Let's go to Mohammed, who's in Manchester. Mohammed, your question.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me, first of all.
You're welcome.
My question, so it's pretty much a repeat of what Lee, the first caller from Newcastle, asked, was around, do Palestinians have the opportunity to live in peace, have civil rights, and actually live before expulsion and before being removed from a land that was once theirs? But obviously, Eylon just used the platform to pummel rhetoric about beheading babies, burning babies, which have all been proven wrong. But
I'm sorry,
my question here,
I'm not sure they have been proven wrong.
My question here is, like Jewish folks all over the world that have never stepped a foot into the country, have the law of return, Palestinians who once lived in the country, who once again, due to expulsion, killing, all sorts, have fled. Once they tried to get back in through the 3 international airports within Israeli territory, are they going to be able to get back in? And second of all, are they going to have the same civil rights and being able to live normally?
Mm-hmm.
They're not Hamas people. They're just standard civilians.
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to be able to live normally, just like all the Jewish folk that have never stepped foot into the country, who have now become civilians?
Mr. Levy.
I hope that we still have time to answer your question, but I have to call out the rampant Holocaust denial-like phenomenon that we are seeing evolve in real time. You know, around the streets of the world, we saw celebrations and jubilations that erupted on October 7th. People on the steps of the Sydney Opera House chanting, "Gas the Jews, gas the Jews." And those protests were triggered by the massacre itself that gave succor and support to anti-Semites around the world. Now, we've shown the evidence to the world. We've shown very painful and difficult images. And Tom, you too have seen that brutal video, 43-minute video of the atrocities. And I'm sure you can't even count the number of burned bodies, people who are burned alive, who are burned afterwards.
Well, about that, Mr. Levy, because you mentioned that twice now, and yes, I have seen it. Why isn't that made publicly available? Why is even the recordings, so the recordings of the audio of Hamas fighters talking to one another, not even the horrific video footage based on family consent or whatever? I can understand why there might be reasons to not make that public. But why is that not given over to fact-checking organisations to go and prove, if you feel, as I think the Israeli media machine must do, that there is a trust deficit here? Why not make that public?
Tom, that information is public because a lot of it is information that Hamas publicized on its own Telegram channels. Hamas proudly recorded the atrocities with its own GoPros and sent it on social media. In some cases, it massacred people in their homes and uploaded videos of their execution on their own social media. Now, most of the footage in that 43-minute long videos of atrocities is already available online, not only on Hamas Telegram channels, but in multiple online resources. There are a few clips within that 43-minute clip that you saw that have not been made public because of the requests of the families, because they show brutal acts being committed against their children. These people have suffered enough. They have been traumatized and scarred for life, and we cannot show this without their consent. But the information and the evidence is out there. And, you know, I would point you just in the direction of the truly groundbreaking investigative report published by the New York Times shortly after Christmas about the sexual atrocities conducted by Hamas.
I saw it.
They interviewed 150 people, 7 different locations, 30 different incidents. And the media, it's not just the New York Times, the BBC, all media have independently verified and reported for themselves on the atrocities that Hamas perpetrated on October 7th. And we think it is tragic that despite all of that, there are many people who continue to cover it up or deny it because they find it difficult to believe what their Hamas heroes did on October 7th.
Let me just finally put to you the question that I think Mohammed is asking, that was put to the ambassador here. Should Palestinians have their own state?
We think that the Palestinians should have every right to govern themselves and none of the rights to threaten Israel. We do not intend to give the Palestinians security control over territory. Well, it is saying that this is a complicated question and that these are long-term political questions, and we hope that we will be able to reach peace with the Palestinians. And in order for that to happen, as the British government has stated very clearly, there can be no place for Hamas in a post-war Gaza because its whole reason for existing is to scupper any prospect of peace. Hamas doesn't want a two-state solution, it wants the final solution. And throughout its many years of existence, it has conducted suicide bombings and missile campaigns to try to scupper any hopes of peace. And we hope that the day after Hamas, the Palestinian people will turn their backs on the sort of violence and terrorism that has led them to this very tragic point in our history.
I have to let you go. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Hope to do this again another time. Eylon Levy, a spokesperson for the Israeli government. You're listening to Tom Swarbrick here on LBC. These are the headlines at 5 o'clock.
If Britain wants more food to reach Gaza, it should simply send more food.
The Israeli government spokesperson Eylon Levy denies the risk of famine in Gaza is stark after warnings by the British government.
When I see a young person that goes to celebrate New Year's Eve and doesn't come home from a knife crime, it just breaks my heart.
Actor Idris Elba urges the government to immediately ban machetes and so-called zombie knives.
I can't give you the answer to that question. I'm not sure.
Fresh criticism for the COVID inquiry, as it's revealed the cost to the taxpayer is £200,000 a day. And
it's simply wrong what happened. They shouldn't have been treated like this, and we should do everything we can to make it right for them.
Rishi Sunak says he would support a review of the CBE given to the former post office boss. Why has it taken a drama to galvanise calls for action?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom.